So at some point when you were playing TFT, you probably ask yourself, how does armor reduction actually work? Does it stack with each other? Does it not stack with each other? What does Weakspot do? How does VIP Draven work? Well, in today's video, I will answer all of these questions. First up, let's go over all the different types of tools that you have to reduce the opponent's armor. On the number 1 spot, we have Last Whisper, which will reduce the opponent's armor by 70% for 5 seconds after inflicting a critical hit. And then we also have the Obsidian Cleaver, which is an Orn item from the Augment Portable Forge. If you deal damage with auto attacks or spells, you reduce the opponent's armor by 60% for 3 seconds. You have Draven, who, if you just simply put him on the board, will ignore 25% of his target's armor. And if you activate his VIP bonus, he will ignore an additional 25%. And at the very end, we have Jace, especially melee Jace. If he slams down his hammer, everybody who gets hit by it will have their armor reduced by 50%. And of course, we have the Augment's Weakspot 1 with 20% armor ignore for all of your units, and Weakspot 2 with 40%. This is a lot to work with, but fortunately a lot of this can be simplified. Let's get the most important core mechanic out of the way first, which is that armor penetration does take priority over ignoring armor. So as a very short example, we have the Jace armor penetration, the Obsidian Cleaver and the Last Whisper. They will be calculated first, and then whatever is left will have a percentage ignored. But before we go into more detail, I think something I should clarify from the very start, which is a question that you might have had, which is that how does Last Whisper and the Jace Ultimate and Obsidian Cleaver work together? And the answer is whatever is highest takes priority. Now Jace is the lowest with 50%, followed by the Obsidian Cleaver with 60%, followed by the Last Whisper with 70%. That means Last Whisper proc takes priority over Cleaver, takes priority over Jace, which means that you can only reduce the opponent's armor by 50, 60 or 70%, depending on which tool you ended up using. Now, one of the most frequent questions I get regarding armor reduction is how does Weakspot actually interact with Draven, and it works a little bit like this. Now, a logical assumption would be that the way it works is additive, and that means that the 50% get added on top of the 40% for a total of 90 armor ignore, which means that if your opponent has 100, you will be left with 10, but it doesn't really work like this. So I provided 2 examples to explain this issue in detail. For our first example, we have a Draven with Last Whisper with an opponent that has 100 armor. First of all, we take the Last Whisper, which reduces the armor from 100 to 30. Then you have Draven himself, who ignores 25% armor of 30, leaving you with 22.5. 22.5 armor results in a damage reduction of 18.37, and that means that the Draven, who currently has a base AD of 90 and he does an auto attack that doesn't crit, it will get reduced to 37.46. Our second example looks more complicated, but honestly it's just a few extra steps. So here we have a VIP Draven with a Weakspot 2 and Last Whisper, obviously assuming that the VIP buff is activated. Your opponent again has 100 armor. Again, we have the Last Whisper reducing the armor to 30, the Draven passive ignoring 25% of that. Then you have the VIP passive, which will ignore an additional 25% of whatever's left. And then you have Weakspot 2, which will ignore an additional 40%, leaving you with a total of 10.125. Then you have to check how much damage gets reduced by 10.125 armor, which is around 9.19. And that means that the 90 AD from Draven gets reduced to a total of 81.72. Something that's a little bit surprising is I initially thought that the VIP Draven would just flat out ignore 50%, not 2 times 25, but this is apparently how it works currently in the game. If you're curious about how the armor damage reduction is calculated, you take 100, you divide it by 100 plus whatever armor is left over, and then you multiply that by the amount of damage that the unit is doing, leaving you with the end result. So in conclusion, Weakspot does have a positive synergy with Draven, and even with Last Whisper, you just have to be careful about the diminished value if you're running something like Last Whisper or Obsidian Cleaver. But it's still something worth pursuing if you want to increase the Draven DPS. So yeah, this is pretty much how armor ignore and armor penetration works and synergizes with each other. I hope you learned something today, and see you the next time.